Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 1 of the FalconCast. My name is Dustin, and I am your host. We have a great program scheduled for you today. We're going to be joined by Mr. Blank, who is a teacher at the high school, and he's going to be telling us about the summer trip to Washington, D.C. Before we get into that, let's do some announcements. The first elementary PTO meeting of the year will be Monday, September 12th at 3:30 p.m. in the library. Everyone is welcome. Elementary School Picture Day is Tuesday morning, September 20th. Parents may purchase school pictures by sending cash, check, or money order on or before Picture Day. Please be sure to send an order form for each of your children separately. Order forms will be sent home with students prior to Picture Day. All students and staff will have their pictures taken that morning. The Vermilion County Health Department has partnered with North Vermilion School Corporation to make school-required vaccines available at no cost. They will be at the elementary school doing vaccines on Monday, September 12th, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Please call the Vermilion County Health Department for an appointment at 765-832-3622. The high school homecoming dance will take place after the football game on Friday, September 23rd until 11:30 p.m. There is a $5 entry fee for all guests. Outside guests are allowed only if a form has been filled out and submitted to the office by the end of school on Friday, September 23rd. Dress is semi-formal for all guests to attend the dance. That is all for the announcements, so let's go ahead and get to our guest, Mr. Blank. Mr. Blank is a teacher at the high school, and he led a trip to Washington, D.C. this summer. Mr. Blank, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Tell us about yourself and how you ended up at North Vermilion.
I just finished, I believe, my 11th year at North Vermilion, 10th or 11th year. They fly by. Originally, I was employed, I believe, 2012. So I came here. I had been a teacher and a coach in Missouri, grew up, went to high school in Terre Haute, and moved back to Indiana from Missouri. And the market kind of bottomed out in teaching, and I ended up working at Vigo County Community Corrections, but I wanted to get back into a school. I wanted to be at a small school. North Vermilion appealed to me in that way. I wanted to know all the kids in the building and not be in a big school. I graduated from a big school, and the small school is really where I wanted to be. So eventually the stars aligned, and an opening came open at North Vermilion, and I was able to get on, and I've been here ever since.
All right. What are some of the roles you've done here at North Vermilion?
I've been a junior high social studies teacher, 7th and 8th grade. I've also coached just about every sport available here, almost. I have been a assistant football coach the whole time I've been here. I've done 7th grade boys basketball, 8th grade boys basketball. I've done 8th grade girls basketball, and then I've been an assistant track coach, as well as sponsoring like academic teams and junior high student council, and of course leading our travel through World Strides.
Which is the main thing we want to talk about today, these trips that you lead, taking students to various places in the country. How did you get involved in leading trips at North Vermilion?
Well, when I got hired here, Mr. O'Neill had originally kind of started the program. When I got hired, he got moved to the high school and basically handed the program over to me if I was interested in it. And I was a little apprehensive at first, just because it's, you're taking a group of kids out and about, but it's been a very rewarding experience for me. So when he decided not to do it, they contacted me and asked if I would be interested in continuing the program, and I was. So my first summer here, 2013, was the first trip I took.
Okay. So how many trips have you led, and where all have you gone?
I have done 9 trips in total. 6 of those have been to Washington, D.C. I've done one just to New York City, and then I've done 2 more to Philadelphia and New York City.
Out of those, do you have a favorite trip?
Washington, D.C. is probably always been my favorite, just because it's so historical in nature. Not that Philadelphia and New York City aren't. Those are just great travel opportunities for our kids to get out and see different parts of the world and go to one of the largest cities in the world in New York City. But Washington, D.C. tends to always be my favorite. It's probably because I have more familiarity with it. I know exactly where things are now, and New York, it's so hard. It's a jungle basically there. So
Yep, for sure. So you've led trips to 3 different cities. What are some of the favorite parts of each of those trips?
well, we'll just start in Washington, D.C. First of all, a couple years ago, we added a little side trip when we went to Washington, D.C. So I've actually been to Gettysburg 4 times. Because of travel and how traffic works in Washington, D.C., it was easier to add a little side trip, so maybe we weren't sitting in traffic for so long after being on a bus. So I always enjoyed Gettysburg, and then this past year we went to Charlottesville, Virginia, and visited Monticello, the home of Thomas Jefferson, which was really, really interesting. I'd been there before, but I don't think anybody in my group had ever been there, so that was an interesting thing. In Washington, D.C., I love all the monuments, specifically Iwo Jima, the Marine Monument, the Air Force Memorial. We go to the Pentagon 9/11 Memorial, the World War II Memorial. But probably my favorite part of the Washington, D.C. trip is when we do the Vietnam War Memorial, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Korean War Memorial, because we do them at night, and it gives it such a different feel than being there during the day with the lighting and all that stuff. Specifically, the Korean War Memorial at night is very eerie. You kind of get a feel for what those guys had to go through there. So those I like doing all the memorials. I would probably enjoy the Smithsonian a little bit more, but it's so hard to get through everything. And the thing about these trips is you want to try and fit in as much as you can, so you kind of avoid the places that are going to take up a lot of time. So you don't really get the full experience of the Smithsonian, but we do visit those. But I would say the memorials are my favorite part. Another great thing about the memorials in Washington, D.C., the last couple of times, this past year at the World War II Memorial, there was an honor flight from Indiana, veterans that were visiting the World War II Memorial. So we got a chance to visit with the veterans. We've also had an honor flight that we got to visit with at the Air Force Memorial one time. And our kids getting a chance to thank the veterans and visit with those guys as they are out visiting their memorials is always a treat for our kids. They always seem to really enjoy it. Philadelphia, we're only there for a day, so we do all the typical type of things. We see the Liberty Bell, the Constitution Center, and then I have not been in Independence Hall, but I've been in Congressional Hall, which is right next to Independence Hall. But just all the early American history that's located in Philadelphia is awesome, and it's pretty easy to get around, and we have always enjoyed that. And then in New York City, it's kind of weird. I enjoy all the parks in New York City. When you're in Central Park, you would have no idea that you're in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world. Yep. You don't feel like you are at all. And then Battery Park, which is when we get off after we go to see the Statue of Liberty and Ellis Island, we always go to Battery Park, which is a really, really neat park. But that surprised me the first time I went to New York City, all the green space that you wouldn't think was available there. There is a lot in the parks, and they do a really nice job with those.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely sounds like a lot of good experiences for our students. Speaking of the last Washington, D.C. trip, you sent me a picture of students climbing on like a statue or a monument. Can you talk a little bit about that?
In Washington, D.C., you're not allowed to be on any of the memorials or monuments except for one, which is the Albert Einstein statue, which is it's not very far from the Vietnam War Memorial. It's actually right across the street. So a couple years ago on one of our trips, one of our tour guides took us there because they were like, this is the only monument in Washington, D.C. that you can climb on. And so every year we try to make it a point to get to the Einstein Monument so we can have our picture climbing up on Albert Einstein as he's sitting there. It's a great experience, but again, like I said, it's the only one you can climb on and be a part of as you're in Washington, D.C. So that's always kind of a highlight for our trip. And usually it's right before we go over and do Vietnam, Lincoln, and the Korean War memorials.
If you want to see that picture, you can see it on the high school Facebook page. Why do you think it's valuable for students to attend trips like these?
It allows them to see different types of people, hear different languages being spoken. It just allows them to see that there's more to the world than their little corner. A lot of kids don't have the opportunity to do a lot of traveling. Parents are busy and those types of things, but this is a real opportunity for them to get out and see more of the world and also get to experience different kinds of peoples and understand that there's things out there that they can go and explore. And I tell the kids when we go on these trips, my idea with these trips is I want them to experience as much as they can. And so if they are fortunate enough to go back to these places with their own families, they'll have a little bit of an idea and say, oh, I really wanted to spend more time in the American History Smithsonian, or I wanted to be able to spend more time at this memorial, because we are trying to get as much done as we can in our limited time. So it's really an opportunity for them to be able to go out, but and experience things that they don't get a chance to experience here. Mass transportation. When we've been to New York City, we've rode the subway, we've rode a city bus, and to see all the differences. And then when we were on the city bus in New York City, it was really cool because the people that we were standing next to were speaking French, and the kids were kind of, they'd really not been in a situation, maybe a little bit of Spanish, but to hear French being spoken by people out and about, I remember that kind of opened their eyes a little bit, and they were really interested in listening to people talk in a foreign language. And just all of those things, I think it gives them a well-rounded educational experience to be able to go on one of these trips and to be able to travel and experience the world around them.
I could definitely see some culture shock coming from northern Vermilion County to a big city like that. It's definitely going to be different. You mentioned the bus. Can you tell? It's not a regular school bus.
No. I would not take these trips if it was a regular school bus. It is always a chartered bus. Really, we've had wonderful bus drivers, wonderful people that make the trip what it is. I've always said to be a successful trip, the first thing it takes is a great bus driver, because I don't know how they maneuver those buses in the traffic that we're in. But it's a chartered bus. Generally, the company that I travel with books it, and we've not had a bad experience yet. We've had wonderful drivers. They get us where we need to go and are able to maneuver themselves in that traffic.
So if students or parents are listening, how do they get involved in upcoming trips?
I will have information out in social media. We will be having, actually, for the summer of 2023, I am planning a trip to Philadelphia and New York again. I will have information available. I will have it handed out. I'll see the kids. I'll have information packets, and then I will have a meeting, and I'll get all that advertised. The biggest thing is if you want to, you can just come to the meeting. I explain everything and answer any questions at the meeting. But if you can't make the meeting, you can take the information that the students bring home, and there's a website that you can go to, and you can sign yourself up for the trip and all of those things. And the Washington, D.C. trip, I generally only run for middle school kids. The Philadelphia, New York City trip is open to anybody, and I also welcome parents to come along. Our last trip to Washington, D.C. and Charlottesville, Virginia, I believe we traveled with 54 people, and of those 54, I think I had about 22 parents that come along. So parents are always welcome to join us on these trips. I've had Roxanne Donovan, our custodian. She's gone on a couple of trips with me. So it's a wonderful opportunity, and I try to keep it as economically viable for everybody and to do those things. And I just think it's a wonderful opportunity, and everything on these trips is included in the price. So it's not like I'm going to hit you up for this and this and this and all over. Whenever you pay for the trip, it includes your travel, your hotel, your meals, tips, tickets to anything that we're going to go do while we're on those trips, and those types of things. So it really is an all-inclusive trip, and it's a pretty quick trip. We usually leave on a Wednesday, and we're back by Sunday morning.
So it's all-inclusive. That makes things easy. How often do you find that, we talked about students getting cultured and not traveling a lot. Do you ever have parents who this is some of their first times getting out of Indiana?
Yeah, and one of the really unique things is that sometimes I think our kids enjoy it, but I think our kids that go enjoy the experience, maybe enjoy being with their friends and the hotels and all those things. The historical things is where the adults that travel with me are like, this is so cool. But when it's much cooler to them now as they're adults and they've gone through school and those kinds of things versus maybe when they were students. Yep. And so they really do enjoy a lot of the things that we get to do. And like I said, our trips are full from the time we arrive to the time we leave. We're generally doing something and experiencing something on these trips.
All right. So from everyone in the North Vermilion community, I'd like to say thank you for leading these trips and culturing our students and getting them the ability to see things that they may not be able to see if you didn't do them. If you are interested in joining one of these trips, make sure you see Mr. Blank. He'll have a meeting early on. Mr. Blank, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And that is all the time we have for this episode of the FalconCast. Thank you for joining us, and make sure you join us next time as we talk about more of what's happening at North Vermilion Elementary School and North Vermilion High School.